Hello and welcome to the Beth of Fresh Air. I'm Beth. I think you guys know that by now. And I have the great pleasure of hosting Matt Ehret today, who is probably going a lot faster than he expected to today. We had a little mix up about the time. So Matt, I see you're in the back stage there, and you can just relax and settle in. And I'll just take a minute to introduce the stream today. So this is episode 15 of the Beth of Fresh Air. If you didn't hear my origin story for this podcast, you can go back to episode 1 and find out how I brought myself back from kind of the dead. That's my specialty, by the way. That's what I do. And today we're going to be covering a subject that is actually, I think it's the first time I have ever done this, is to talk about geopolitics really directly. So I'm kind of, what would you call it, allergic to politics. So I've spent most of my life avoiding it like the plague. And it's a hard subject to get into, especially when you have seen behind the curtain and you know more or less that, history is compromised at some level, although I'm extremely interested to talk to Matt about that. And so this series, Evolve, on the Beth of Fresh Air, which will go on for, I think, for some time because it's the biggest possible subject I could have chosen, is about the evolution of culture and society and what can we know about it. And therefore, what can we know about ourselves, understand the context that we're working in these days, especially. It's pretty wild out there. There are 2 more episodes coming up, so that are planned so far, maybe even 3. We just don't have a date for the 3rd one. So next Friday, January 30th, Dagmar Stansova is going to come, and her expertise is in the evolution of culture through performing arts. So that's going to be super interesting, and you guys know Dagmar from several episodes already. And then the week after, February 6th, author Mara West is coming on, who is very unpopular for her views on feminism. She would be popular with me and around here, but she gets a lot of shit talking, let's say, out there in the world. I try not to swear too much, but I just seem to have to say that word once in a while. And welcome to Eliza, who has been waiting patiently in her own time zone for the actual 2 o'clock that is here in Central Time. Jackie Kay made it 8 p.m. in Great Britain. Not too bad. Not too late, just a good time to relax and tune in. So this is on the King Hero channel on YouTube. We're also live on Facebook and Rumble at the same time. My videos, by the way, disappear from Facebook. So the only place you're going to see them more permanently is YouTube and Rumble for now. And very good. So I wanted to introduce you to Matt, and I'll just let you know from his bio side, and then we'll bring him right on. He is a journalist and co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation, which is really cool. I actually love the name. He is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review, Dean of Political Science at the American University of Moscow, very interesting, and host of Pluralia Dialogos. He's smiling. He has authored the book series, The Untold History of Canada, which I really actually want to read, and I apologize I haven't dove in yet, but we'll be learning about it. And the 4-volume Clash of the Two Americas, Science Unshackled, and his 3-volume series, Revenge of the Mystery Cults. So without further ado, I will be bringing Matt right on now. Hello and welcome, Matt. It's nice to meet you.
Hello, Beth. It's nice to meet you too. I'm very pleased to be with you.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's funny how we haven't had a real live conversation yet. We're going to do that in the company of our friends today, and sometimes that is how it goes. I will say that full disclosure, I use my podcasts often as a way to get to know somebody.
Yeah.
To have that conversation, because you can look into their work and you can read their things and you get some idea, but until I'm face to face, there's something, or there's more information for me on the face to face.
I do the same thing. I began as a writer, but then I found myself increasingly going on to other people's podcasts. And a couple of years back, I was like, hey, I could just have my own podcast too and talk to all sorts of people I would normally never be able to encounter. And what a great icebreaker that is. So I've learned a lot just talking to tons of folks just by having my own thing as well. It educates the people that are following you, and at the same time it educates ourselves as well. So it's a win-win.
You got it. That's exactly it. And when I want to know something, I often want to talk to them first,
Yeah.
and then I'll spend the time. So, you know what my favorite one of your podcasts recently was? It was Mindy Petchinek. Did I say her last name? She looked at the evolution of cultural,
Oh
pardon me, of
yeah.
classical music.
Right. Yeah, she gave a wonderful lecture. We host these weekly lectures for the Rising Tide Foundation every Sunday, and we look for people who just have who've worked on ideas that they've internalized and that they want to teach, and we try to theme it so that we have maybe 4 or 5 weeks dealing with a certain topic of literature or art or science or what have you. And she fell into the classical art reappreciation theme. And so she's a performing artist, somebody who's conducted many choral works, and is a political activist too. Bonus. So she has a certain moral identity that she understands to be tied to her artistic sensibilities. So she gave a wonderful presentation showcasing how our culture was undermined even before you and I were born. The movement, the operation to weaken our cultural fiber was already in play. That really, I mean, she just showcased, I think, really well the higher quality of a Beethoven symphony, of the mind of a Mozart, of a Bach, of a Schubert, of a Schumann, and the quality of creative discipline that is both spontaneous as well as rigorous at the same time. Right, it walked in both worlds, which is something which awakens, I think, in the heart of people who are influenced and who learn how to give their love to that type of higher beauty, a passion and a power of understanding and of discipline that makes them more problematic for those who would wish to enslave us and keep us living in very short attention span, myopic, hedonistic sort of identities that make us more pliable, more inclined to adapt to a herd, not think for ourselves. So her presentation was just glorious.
It really was. I was so inspired. I was actually born and raised on classical music,
Ah,
but because it was always there, I didn't pay attention to any details around it. It was just in my background. It was in my blood.
right.
I noticed how my parents gravitated towards the composers that were, more on that like sort of freedom path, if you
Hmm.
could call it that. And not surprising, right? Like your soul knows that one is more in the likeness of the divine, and the other is some kind of like domination, gives you a headache and makes you want to barf on a Sunday drive.
Well, yeah, I mean, just compare like, the Mozart's Ave Verum Corpus versus like Sam Smith's Unholy. And even though one is more popular in our current society than the other, one is certainly divine. One will move you to tears in its beauty, and that balances like a sublime and a melancholy quality at the same time with the Ave Verum, which Mozart was writing really on his deathbed. Like he knew his mortality was what he was looking at in the face, and yet he chose not to cower or be depressed, but he wrote this glorious homage to creation. And then you've got things that are being fed down our throats by satanic agencies that are trying to like destroy our youth through like again, unholy. I mean, people I think have seen the performance of this thing at the Emmys, and it's not a one-off. It's not an isolated case of something unfortunately satanic in the popular zeitgeist. It's like an embodiment of what is becoming completely normalized. And what does that do to your aesthetical sensibilities, your soul's ability to just sort of have an appreciation for what beauty or ugliness is? It's wrecked. So, and I think by design, it's not an accident.
Yes, exactly. You're speaking the lover archetype in my world, by the way, and that's
Mm,
the one that whose mission it is to bring the beauty that reflects the divine to
mm,
the people.
mm,
That's very important for them. Truth and beauty are the same thing. It
mm.
is a direct relationship with the divine, as opposed to asking your society or your people, what should I do that I should fit in here? And it's just between them and God. If you use that word, it's problematic, I know.
Hmm. Well, and those ideas, like it's a profound idea that I think it was very close to Mozart's heart, to Beethoven, to Schiller, that truth and beauty. Even Shelley, at the end of the Ode on a Grecian Urn has the little punchline that beauty is truth and truth is beauty. That's all you know on earth. That's all you need to know. And it's like beautiful because like these are two ideas that are typically in a compartmentalized dysfunctional society. They're broken apart and treated as if they're two incompatible things, where beauty is treated as something in the domain of the philosopher or the artist who's supposed to just be, flaky, into their feelings. And truth is something for the engineer, for the scientist and the mathematician who's not supposed to have their thoughts polluted by their emotions. And two different sort of sets of rules apply to these two different aspects of the same thing. And it's like if you break them apart, you break up the human. The human is supposed to be, and I think that's also why some of the best artists also have a very scientific foundation. And a lot of the greatest scientists made their discoveries as as Einstein and Max Planck had both made the point that they located their creative power of making discoveries, which other simple mathematicians or logicians were incapable of doing, by having a deep relationship to the violin, to the piano, and they would perform Mozart together when they were having trouble trying to unlock a problem in the mathematical realm. They couldn't do it. And so they had to just shift gears, go into the musical space, and then return back to the problem with a wider heart and mind that could then create the eurekas. And they were trying to make it clear in their writings and their teachings. They're always trying to like hammer their students and people who they knew were going to read their writings years after they were dead, to try to get across, like, if it's not magical, I mean, there's a magic to it, but it's not a cult. It's anybody and everybody can do this. It's our rights. And if you don't do this, you won't make discoveries. You'll make descriptive models, maybe, but you'll have no way of knowing that they're true or false. You'll just, you'll waste your time. You'll be in a purgatory of description, and you won't have the satisfaction of knowing what it means to be a human. And then you won't even know what the because you won't make proper discoveries, as today in our whole society is sort of like floating. We're floating with a sort of control grid of obedience to standard doctrines, or standard models as they call them in quantum mechanics, whether it's atomic science, physics, earth science, health science, Rockefeller-funded health science, or climate science, you name it. There's common control mechanisms that demand that if you want to be a teacher, you want to be a professor, you want to work in academia, you want to work in R&D, and you want to get grants, then you have to pay homage and adapt your mind to certain rules that are completely controlled, and that will guarantee that you will never make discoveries, and that presume that the emotions have to stay in another universe. You can't. And if you want to be an artist and you want to get a grant and you want to make money, get fame, pay your bills, you can't allow the idea that reason should contaminate your artistry. It should be pure raw emotion with no thoughts. That doesn't create necessarily anything good either. Nope. So it's a fun exploration to sort of revisit why our society is buying into a lot of these conspiracies and has allowed for a lot of these terrible geopolitical decisions to occur by our consent. And why don't so many people who seem to be educated seem to have the power to identify what's behind it, where this is going, what the consequences are of this folly. And it has a lot to do with what we're discussing here, that a lot of people just miss this. They don't take the time to explore this terrain.
You said like a whole book there. Oh. There's so much in there. I love that. Yeah, my brain's going in many different directions. I would like to back it up, and just because I'm just getting to know you and we're getting to know you, shout out to Julian Camastra, who introduced us, by the way. I'm not sure if he's going to be here live, but he was very excited to hear you were on this week.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw your talk that you gave at his actual place, his barn there that he's got really nicely set up. I hope I get there. And so do you want to just say, like, how did you get into this work in the first place? How did you, and it's your wife that created the Rising Tide Foundation, and getting into this work? What's it like to be in a mainstream, as a dean of political science, but in Moscow? So maybe I'll leave it at 3 questions for right now. Let you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay.
Background.
So I guess I'll do the first one first, and then the other one, the second one second, and the third one first. Third.
As you like.
Forget what I just said. I confused myself there. So the Dean of Political Science thing, that is actually the American University in Moscow. The founder of it, I was working with Dr. Edward Lazansky, who is a former Soviet dissident who defected back in the late 70s to the United States and became a freedom fighter, somebody who made a high priority on trying to stop World War III and to create, after 9/11, he pushed a lot for the idea of creating a U.S.-Russian friendship based upon common cooperation, cultural exchange, economic exchange that would be beneficial to everybody. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that he thought he could trust back in the 80s and 90s turned out to be backstabbers who simply wanted to loot Russia. And so he found himself really isolated. And a lot of the promises that he had to create a real university in Moscow, which was part of this hoped for plan, was to be able to bring in the best of American science and engineering to help give a spirit of freedom and also progress to Russia that had gotten very stagnant under many years of Soviet sort of formulas. That didn't end up working out. He was given the buildings by the Russian side, so the Russians followed through on their promise to say, okay, we'll provide all of the buildings and the land in the 1990s when the Soviet Union disintegrated. But then the U.S. side, George Bush and then Bill Clinton, they had promised to fund it all, and they didn't do that. They, as it turned out, their idea was to simply rape and pillage Russia and privatize everything, which is what they did under Perestroika. So again, he was left isolated, and he decided not to let the idea of the American University in Moscow completely disintegrate. He turned it into a nonprofit and used it principally as a lobbying sort of group in Washington, where he started hosting conferences to promote friendship and war avoidance, and online seminars as well on history and things. So it was back in 2020 that I started helping him out with some events, and he asked me to lecture to some of his students, and I did, and it was great. We had a great experience. So he asked me to come on as somebody who would help shape some more of the programs. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year. At this point, I'm not even too sure where the American University is legalistically at this point after his death. So that may not be a thing. It's sort of, but it's sort of evolving a little bit in some ways with Pluralia, which is an Italian-based news agency that also promotes conferences that he was working with, and that brought me in to host weekly seminars as well and podcasts, basically just dealing with bringing in experts in geopolitics or economics to talk about where they think the world is at any given moment. So that's been an enriching experience. As far as the Rising Tide Foundation. Oh, yes, go on.
Jump in just quickly. Has it been difficult to work in that? Is it mainstream academia? It's in America, not Moscow.
No, it's actually, the headquarters of the American University in Moscow was both, there's one office in Moscow and one office in Washington. So it had two different outlets. I'm in Canada though. So I was just a helper, in that sense. And that's where I'm saying it was never difficult it got more difficult with Russiagate. So Lazansky, when he suffered quite a bit under Russiagate, and he was portrayed as this Russian agent, and his offices were periodically destroyed. So people would come by, throw bricks in the windows of his home and of his office, and things got very tense and difficult to do the sorts of things that he was formerly doing with no problems in the early 2000s under the Bush and Cheney years and Obama years. And with Russiagate, it got crazy. It did get more rough in the USA, and sanctions obviously didn't help. So there's been this new Cold War hysteria that's been sort of, we all saw it happen, right? Some of us got pulled into it for a bit and then got pulled out of it as we realized what was really shaping our realities. But a lot of the hypnotic inductions that we'd all suffered under throughout the entirety of the Cold War as children, a lot of baby boomers were traumatized as kids, doing duck and cover exercises, being told every day that the Soviets want to murder you and your family and bomb the world and create a Soviet global dictatorship. So that's something that was repeated for kids in their formative years in the 50s and 60s. as so it kind of like we never resolved that. The Soviet Union just kind of like 1991 picks up, dissolves voluntarily. It's over now all of a sudden, but none of the trauma and the transgenerational trauma was dealt with. So I think what's been happening first with the Democrats, who were induced to, develop a Trump derangement syndrome as soon as, 2016 hits, all of those sleeping ghosts were brought to the surface using similar kinds of messaging and narrative patterns that had been created in our zeitgeist throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s. It was just brought right back up because we never resolved it. And now, and increasingly it expanded to also, brainwash, I guess you could say brainwash the conservatives with their own spin on the evil. Instead of the conservatives tend to like Russians because they're white and Christian a little bit more. So they're a bit more immune to that idea that the Russians are the bad guys. But for the conservative side, it's been more the same kind of narratives, except it's China. That's your enemy that you have to hate and fear. So everything is re-spun around the idea that China is your hate image that you have to give your fear to, and ignore the actual Satanists that have been infiltrating and taking over our society, and killing JFK and doing 9/11. Ignore that thing, please do, and just give it to that grouping on the other side of the world. So we've all suffered from it. All that to say, that's what Ed Lozansky had to deal with. So it was challenging. And as far as the first part of your question on where do we, my wife and I, where do we come from? What got us into this? What got me into this? Mm-hmm. So the Rising Tide Foundation, we created as a nonprofit in 2019. And people can go to the website, risingtidefoundation.net. We did it.
Right now. I'll post the link in the chat right now.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
It's also in the notes below for anyone that's seeing this after.
Sweet. Okay, very cool. So the idea of that was we'd already been writing geopolitical commentaries and our thoughts on a few public platforms for a little while. And we found that it wasn't satisfying what our souls yearned for. At the end of the day, it's like, okay, I'm exposing evil, I'm exposing corruption, but, is this really having an enduring quality of effect? And not really at the end of the day. It's kind of like it pays the bills to write an article that people like, but it's still not dealing with how people are thinking and feeling. And so we're like, well, let's create a bigger space for some of that more deeper cultural work that we're passionate about to really have room to blossom. And so the Rising Tide Foundation became a more educational, cultural orientation that provided a place for longer essays exploring, battles in literature, poetry, culture, and just also looking for the common principles in how these expressions of moral goodness developed or found a language to blossom and to shape the culture in India throughout history, or where did it express itself? These moments of goodness and progress express themselves in China or in Africa, and how do they have similarities? How did those same principles have different forms materially as they did in the case of, let's say, the Florentine Golden Renaissance, or and then what are the political sub battles that accompany those bursts of progress? Because did those self-professed overlords that wish to enslave and control humanity simply give us out of I don't know, pity or generosity, artistic excellence in periods where our populations improved in quality and quantity of longevity and quality of life and architectural beauty? Did these things happen because of the oligarchy giving it to us, or was there a fight? And sure enough, you'll always find in all parts of the world that there's always a fight, as well as never given. Freedom's always something that you have to fight for if it's going to be authentic. So that Rising Tide Foundation was that. And on a deeper level, I guess the reason why, or where we found, I'll speak for myself. Cynthia and I, we began, Cynthia Chung's my wife, and we began working together back in 2007. We met each other, but we didn't get together. We met each other, and it was in something called the Schiller Institute, which had a a small outlet in Canada, in Montreal, which is where we were both studying and working at that time as students. And we were both pretty jaded. I think we had a healthy or maybe unhealthy dose of cynicism and trust issues about the way the world works. So we were both attracted to a lot of the political ambitions and messages of that Schiller Institute at the time. And we both found ourselves as, coming to meetings on a regular basis, discussing what's wrong with the world. So I ended up becoming more serious. I got more involved as a full-time activist and volunteer almost immediately. I was like, our whole society's screwed. So this is the only thing that kind of makes sense to me. So I just decided to do that and quit my job. I dropped out of school and I just did that almost full time for 10 years. And I think overall it was a very good growth experience for me. It gave me a lot of spiritual muscles that I would not have gotten otherwise. It gave me a cultural immersion into a classical education, because there was a certain curriculum also that was very attractive to me that I couldn't get that anywhere else. So I was like, okay, let's do that there. Where we had groups, young people meeting up regularly, working through the dialogues of Plato, of Homer, working through the constructive geometry of Pythagorean solids and constructive geometrical problems that dealt with astronomy. So we were doing this on a very regular basis, which was very nice. And again, you don't get that sort of thing in the mainstream universities or schools. So that was good within the context of a political fight. So we're doing events in Ottawa, we're going down to Washington, doing events there, lobbying Congress. So it was all kind of together. It was I think it was a good learning. That was my education, I guess you could say. What I find to be whatever I have of value that I use in my own research and compositions and outreach today comes from that experience. And Cynthia, she stuck with school and kept with that, but she kept on coming in and around, and we were always friends. And then she got more serious around 2013 around the political fight where she realized, okay, it is really, really bad. Like there's nothing going on for our future. So we started working much more closely together around that time. And again, we learned a lot about the culture. People like Mindy Petchnuk were the sorts of people we were interfacing with, which are very unique sorts of musicians, artists, activists. And unfortunately, again, for myself, there were certain personality conflicts, as there often are in these sorts of things, where I just found it was a bit stifling in my neck of the woods, where I just couldn't grow as a person beyond a certain point. So we kind of went off and began to work independently around 2017 or so. And that's been a new phase of our growth and journey. So the Rising Tide Foundation sort of came out of that process. The work we do on the Canadian Patriot site and the books that we've published are sort of the effect of that process.
Very good. Wow, that's amazing. You look so young, Matt.
Oh, she puts creams on my face, and I don't like it, but she makes me do it. But yeah, no, I'm 43. Okay,
good for you. Yeah, you're aging well, I'll say.
Thank
you. Just as an aside, it's funny because I was hosting Brennan Sterling the other day on the King Hero Sturdy podcast. He's an economics guy. He looks like he's 12. He's really 30, but that's kind of 12 to me, because I'm like 30 years older than he is. So, or almost, not quite, a few years short.
Yeah, I was going to say that. That's, okay, all right.
Yeah, and so this is the nature of the world. I don't want to get us too far off our track, because we got a very specific track here, and I got a few things to add to what you just said too. But the way that we navigate in our world has relegated a great deal of knowledge and expertise into younger generations, right? And that seems to be an evolution of society overall, where our elderly, who were traditionally the holders of the wisdom that was passed down through the ages, is not really that way anymore, because their knowledge didn't apply to our world, and they were also the assault of so-called medicine and the dumbing down of consciousness and the funneling. My poor grandmother, she just wanted to learn and grow. That was her thing, but she was not popular, and barely had a friend in that context, because they were all playing bingo and they were gossiping and they were, getting into fake religion that she even tried to get into it just so she could have some friends, but it was not really possible. So, what do you want to say anything about that? The
Yeah,
ending?
sure. Well, yeah, it's a tough situation that we find ourselves, and I think it's a very unique problem in some ways, that humanity typically hasn't had this sort of thing that we're now confronting, which is that we've had several successive generations that have been like before World War One, and or that the little before, during, and a bit after World War One, you had what's known as the lost generation, right? So um, that was a generation, a lost generation of people who saw the world turn upside down. They saw a lot of bad things. World War One was a horror show. Everyone was traumatized. Europeans were completely traumatized. Canadians to a lesser degree, but we still went through a lot. Americans too. And the economy was largely turned into a basket case for that period. There wasn't a lot of sense of goals for the future. So people were floating in nihilism, and that was bad. But you still had a recovery, a revitalization of purposefulness coming out of the Great Depression and the battle against global fascism, which was itself, the more you know, it's like actually a complete bankers' war being funded by Wall Street and London financiers who had orchestrated the Great Depression. So the fact that they didn't win is a bit of a miracle, because they wanted to. That was supposed to be the foundation of a global new world order of feudalism restored under a high priesthood like 80 years ago. So it didn't happen because there was a fight, and largely, if people don't know about the details of that fight, if they were asked, it's because it's been written out of our history books. But that's why I write my books. That's part of my passion, is to try to feed my soul with reasonable hope. So I was always animated by the question of are we screwed? Has the oligarchy really always been these godlike forces of omniscient, omnipotent power to do what they will forever? Or has there been a fight to thwart their ambitions? And their ambitions are always the same thing, kill off most people, keep them stupid, talking cows under feudalism. Like, that's as far as I can see it. In the ancient world or in the medieval world or in today's world, it's always the same general formula is what they want. So it didn't happen. So why didn't it happen? What are the stories? What are the battles that have been maybe obscured that we could learn from and extract lessons out of in order to inform our current strategies in our current crisis-ridden age, right? So, okay, back to your question on the generational issue. There was a revitalization of purposefulness that came out of those who risked so much to defeat fascism, and that gave rise to a new cultural standard of moral excellence. Problematic, never perfect, but still grounded in natural law, that gave rise to people like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., who didn't emerge out of a vacuum as these superheroes inserted into a shit show. They there was a cultural field that was active in which they incubated and grew their identities with a network of collaborators, friends, people they could trust, that were able to conspire for the good. Even though sometimes their conspiracies were cut off before it could fully blossom, the reality was it was very potent what JFK did in the 3 years that he battled. And the same thing for Martin Luther King during the 10 years that he was battling. And so I guess the problem here is that we've now got, since the mass murders, assassinations of the 60s, probably peaking with Bobby Kennedy and Fred Hampton, and in Quebec, Pierre Laporte, the deputy prime minister, and there are a few others in Europe. The baby boomers who had been subjected to so much shock therapy culturally and politically as young people, being sent off to the Vietnam War, watching their family members and friends coming back in body bags or just addicted to heroin, which is a big consequence of people who went to the Vietnam War and were told to do horrific things. And then, how do you cope? But with degeneracy, there's drugs everywhere that are free flowing. Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, they're all, heroin growing regions being run by the CIA. and their assets in the Taiwanese KMT Gestapos that are like running our drug trade, and they're making it abundant for millions of young Americans to come back as addicts, having like just wrecked. So people are being very, very much turned into a new lost generation at that period, and seeing their great leaders who are expressing all of this hope being cut down in front of their eyes on mass television. And then, just drugs are pouring into universities across the board. Like you pointed out, there's wacky new agey theories being infused into society that's accompanying CIA-run LSD that's everywhere, coming again out of the CIA. It's not like an organically emerging thing that just like was produced by a bunch of hippies wanting to like save the world. It was done by the CIA and military intelligence that cooked this stuff up and then infused that into our universities. And other drugs too, DMTs and psilocybins, all came with kind of dislodging the sensibilities of an entire generation that very few today have been able to piece together what happened to them. It's understandably very difficult. And then their kids, and then so this became a very pliable generation that was confused, good people with good intentions, but very confused. And then their kids produced a new, so that we're now 3 generations of lost generations into the state. And like you said, usually at a time of crisis, you'd go to the elderly who have the memory keepers, who have the wisdom of experience of having fought the fights that saved us and learned the lessons of folly in the past. And today, those are very few and far in between. So it leaves the impetus here for us younger folk to try to figure this out using as much as we can from those older folk who have their wits about them. And again, they're there, but there's very few, and also research. And we got to just sort of piece together now, without that lived experience, how the hell did we overcome, and how can we, use these lessons in a way that will be potent in our current crisis? Because otherwise, the way I think we are in danger, several generations of destroyed youth that train in and produce destroyed youth that are, that's a big civilizational crisis that could possibly spell the seeds of a dark age. Like that could involve slipping into, you could say we're culturally in a dark age, maybe that I could, but we're not physically, like the physical shockwave of the consequence of that hasn't hit yet. And this is where I think that people are being acclimated by predictive programming in almost everything you want to try to watch when you want to like get back from work and tune off and just like watch a movie or a show or whatever, play a video game just to like relax and prepare for the next day of the grind. Almost everything that you have to pick from these days is post-apocalyptic, zombie apocalypse, Fallout, whatever, that I think is partially designed to desensitize you to these unnatural but very real possibilities of calamity befalling us in the not so distant future, and also like preparing us psychologically for the idea that, well, maybe all we can do, maybe it's a natural outcome that this inevitably will happen, and so the best you could do is prepare yourself to emotionally just adapt to that new reality and try to like find a tribe that you can survive with, and that's the best you got. Survive as long as possible until you don't. it's really kind of sad to see that. Well, what about solving the problem? Like, what about like the type of artistry that would encourage us to think of the future with a positive spirit, and would help us maybe want to solve problems that maybe these collapses are not natural. Maybe World War III is not a natural consequence, and maybe we could do things to stop it. But those are harder to find, and I think we need to do more to make more entertainment that is of a healthy nature about the future.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that's precisely why I was interested in having you on, because I haven't participated in all there's a lot of guys out there that want to point out the wrongs and the deceptions and the missed and lost hidden history and reasons for why we're where we are, but without the optimism what's it for? I'm like, what? Why bother?
I
It's as,
know.
right, and it really does erode and play into the destruction and the dystopian nature that we have. Like you said, the predictive programming is preparing us for this. So it's
Yeah.
all part of it, right? They don't realize they're actually feeding into the same thing.
Yeah, it's, and I don't blame them in a sense, like the, and but at the same time, you need to have the the faith that humanity is destined for something better than this, and has at its best been better than what we see ourselves now. And I think that's part of the problem is, so okay, when I was working with the Schiller Institute for that 10-year period between 2006 and 2016, it was affiliated with a now deceased philosopher by the name of Lyndon LaRouche. I don't know if you've looked into or heard of the name.
Just heard of, but not with
Okay.
any association. Yeah.
So he was an extraordinary mind. And one of the points that I found very provocative that he had made is that um, sense perception is, so sense perception is a beautiful thing. I mean, great. We got these five senses, and we learn how to use them. But what's interpreting the senses that our eyes, our smell, our hearing, our taste, our touch are giving us, it's not the thing that's infusing value and meaning into the purely infinite quantitative influx of sensory data. Is a decision and discernment. There's something else that's not in the senses that, though the eyes can see, the thing that sees sight will not be the eyes. The eyes can't see sight. The sight is a power. The ears can hear things, but they can't hear hearing. So the idea of sight, of hearing itself, are principles that are transcendental, that can be seen, but only through the mind's eye, right? So you can understand what the power is, but that means that we have to have an identity which learns how to differentiate between senses as instrumentation and the soul, which is more transcendental and divine and higher, that lives in and moves more comfortably in the realm of the eternals, of the universals, of principles, that we can then, if we have that differentiation, we could then zero in and then triangulate on, well, what is this thing called sight, and how does it relate to hearing, and why are there certain harmonies in hearing based on certain frequencies that will move the soul, whether it's in a major or minor mode in music, or in the Dorian and the Phrygian modes that result in either a more solemn feeling state when you're playing one, versus, let's say you want to go to war, you might play I think it's the Dorian or the Lydian melodies. Yeah, that'll get you more into that's the sort of thing you would want to play if people have to like go and defend their city from an oncoming, horde of barbarians. You don't want to play something super mellow. So what's up with that? What's up with that, right? And then how about the melodies of the sight, of how certain harmonies of, let's say, the golden proportion and certain aesthetical proportions that our visual domain takes in? How are they the same? How are they different from the frequencies of the audio domain? So the mind can begin to explore by contrasting similarities, looking for differences in the sights, and building up resources, muscles that I think help train us to understand how to, again, see with the mind's eye, tempered by heart, right? So, and that question of conscience, of aesthetics, of beauty, are all factors that have to sort of like guide the mind's power of moving and questioning and posing paradoxes. And when that's done well, we usually find that, again, we make discoveries, we start having ideas in our minds that maybe freedom is more than the right to go to the store to buy whatever kind of or we're free, we're free to buy whatever kind of flavor of weed, indica or sativa, or whatever kind of weed we want. We're free to buy it, or pizza toppings. Maybe freedom is something more than that, and we could contemplate those higher ideas and start loving those higher ideas to the point that we're willing to fight for and even suffer the consequences of fighting for those higher ideas, because the love and the joy we get from doing that is of such a transcendental nature that the body is more than willing to suffer the consequences, of the discomforts of taking those risks for our the sake of our soul's health. So that's when you start looking at what animates the greatest political movers of the founding fathers of America, or the greatest artists around Friedrich Schiller and Percy Bysshe Shelley and John Keats. you're like, okay, they're tapping into that well. They're all like, and they're all trying to hone their own ability to be better people, while at the same time using their artistry to help others realize how their senses are not the source of your identity or your foundation upon which you make judgments. And that's, again, the beautiful thing about metaphor, about poetry, if it's done well, is you can communicate profound truths very simply, but in a way that is completely nonlinear, that forces the mind to break free of a belief in literality, right? That truth is located either in a definition or what some groupthink tells me or what some authorities tell me. And so poetry really does help you do that. Everything in that higher realm does that. So, I mean, in our world, we're I think very much controlled by, and these analysts that you're referring to that tend to be a little bit black-pilled, that kind of create a bit of a weight, like, so that they're communicating profound, like very useful, you could say useful, okay? They're communicating many mind-blowing truths about evil shaping our world, but it's a weight. It's not, we find increasingly more and more that it's disempowering. But so what's the problem? It shouldn't not, if it's true knowledge, shouldn't knowledge come with a power of changing and the thing that you're knowledgeable of? If you have knowledge of sickness as a doctor, you're more empowered to help the patient. So if what we think we're putting into us is knowledge, but we're actually reducing our power of curing the patient, maybe it's actually not really knowledge. Maybe there's something missing. And I think that part of that core is contaminated by the fact that too many amongst, especially the younger people, but everybody is affected to varying degrees, this idea that they extrapolate their idea of humanity in the broad general sense from the shitty displays of human beings that they encounter at our particular little moment in time, where mediocrity, corruption, all of these things are running rampant. And that's a mistake, because that to extrapolate out to say that we our idea of humanity itself is, and our idea of what happened in the past is going to be colored by what we're seeing in our present shitty circumstance is it doesn't work. Because the reason why we're in the shitty circumstance is because we let go of the things that made us good in the past, the things that gave us the freedoms that we have. We abrogated those responsibilities to maintain them. And so that's why we're in the shitty circumstance. It's like the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings, right? Which is the famous quote from Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, from Cassius. And it's a serious thing. Like, we're always looking for, like, oh, it's the oligarchy is doing this to us, or like whatever is doing this to us. But it's like, kind of, but also we are kind of partially, we have free will. You know, we had the mind to do better than it has done. We've consented to allowing this to take over our house. So now there's consequences where this stupidity is tolerable to, like, the universe. My philosophy is, you know, God, people have different ideas of God, but whatever that idea is of the creator, the creative force, I believe that the universe is created good and ordered and reasonable and beautiful. And it will, because we have free will, we can choose to abide by or be confused that lies are truth and ugliness is beauty for a period, and allow that stupidity to run its course for a period, but not indefinitely. At a certain point, there will be consequences to not watering your garden. The garden will, you know, might look good for a few days, but at a certain point, things wilt unless you make corrective changes. And I think we're still in a place where we can make the corrective changes, but the cultural soil, that metaphysical cultural soil, has really been neglected badly and given really bad, you know, Gatorade that's been poured onto the soil, thinking that it's water for too many years now. So it's going to take a lot of work to rehabilitate the garden.
Right. Yeah. Just, you reminded me of the metaphor of the lotus, and it's the flower that will grow out of the worst muck.
Mm.
So it's considered to be one of the all-time most glorious expressions of the divine. So I'd like to go back just because when you're talking about the senses, kind of versus the soul, you know, how the bad guys, or however we want to call them, they go out of their way to capture our sense attention, our the time that we spend. They want it to have their content, like you were saying, so that we can project that onto our future and move forward from a kind of agented place. And so what I teach in my work is discrimination, where you can actually sort out, okay, what's the code from the senses? The senses are giving you this information. What's the meaning that you've made out of that code? And to be able to tell the difference, to be able to actually observe structures in the unconscious that I call architectures. It's just a metaphor. Like, there's no words that can really describe it, just pointing towards it. But nonetheless, they can learn to see, so that when we get sense code from our environments that say, you're in danger, you're going to die right now, you can start to interact not just at the emotional level, which is what they want, right? They want you to have the sense information. They want you to have the emotional drive and compulsion to act out of integrity with reality, right? And how does it ultimately happen? It's not like, yes, it's weaponized against us, but I also have a strong belief and value for free will, and see that we do the programming of our own self. It's not them. And this is very empowering. You're never actually a victim at the mercy, even of the worst circumstances, which can be tragic. But the nature that we've programmed ourselves, and that you can see that. Finally, just wanted to point out the identification is their ace in the hole, because as soon as we identify ourselves with a sense experience or an attachment to that or an aversion to that, their senses are highly polarizing, then that identity is what hooks us, right? So to let go of a program that is beating you up and telling you that nothing good could ever happen in your future, nothing good has ever happened in the past, the only reason that they hold on to it is because it feels like who they are in identity.
Yes.
So anyway, that's
a great point. Yeah, those are great points.
We identify other people, right? All the Trump haters out there. You've psychically identified Trump with an experience inside yourself, and that's how you hold on to that, fear of a leader. Not to say that it's not warranted. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. I don't.
Well, both sides do it, right? Like, we're so polarized that on the one hand, those people who suffer, I think it's a thing. I think everyone, even people who have it, have acknowledged. I've spoken to people who have it, and they acknowledge that it's there, but they don't, know how to think differently. But there is this thing called Trump derangement syndrome, which is like an irrationally extreme emotional reaction to anything that invokes the orange man, anything, and that destroys any capacity to have a reasonable discourse or discussion, who thinks on the opposite side of the fence. And inversely, people who are of the MAGA pro-Trump liberty like orientation, some of whom can get quite extreme, some of whom can fall into a bit of a religious, and I've seen a number of this problem too, where the line is blurred between Trump as a man versus Trump as a messiah. That gets a bit weird, and people will, on that side of the fence, often dehumanize those who are on the liberal side as being, oh, you're vaxxed means you don't have a soul, or you're just a zombie without, who's less than human in a sense. And both sides have a tendency, when they're at their worst, of treating the other side as an elitist sort of you're less than human thing, which was beyond any capacity to have dialogue, and not that different from the sorts of problematic thinking that got us into things like the 30 Years' War of Europe, where Protestants and Catholics, who both love Jesus and they both call themselves Christian and they both aspired to the principles of the Bible, found themselves massacring each other for 30 years, where Germany lost like half of its population and most of its big towns. And for what? For what? They had so much in common. And yet they forgot how to be able to treat the other like a human, which has God-given reason, though thinks differently, and thus you could still talk and work through discourse and dialogue and find common ground. They just lost that completely. So I think we're always in danger of slipping into those mistakes, even today in our modern enlightened age.
Exactly. Oh, there's so much, man.
Yeah.
On the emotional side alone, the hijacking. People don't like their low emotions, so they go up the scale into higher emotions, and And then they get to, on the scale, they get to pride. Now, pride is the higher emotion of our, you could call it negative emotions, but all emotions are programmed with fear regardless. And then when people get to pride, there's a sense of arriving, like they made it. They're not in apathy, grief, fear, lust, or anger anymore. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm good, but everybody else isn't. And then the function of it is to separate. I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm higher, I'm lower. Pride can work both ways. And it's all basically to separate us and not experience the natural state of oneness that actually is, that's irrefutable. You can't even negotiate that. So I think that's a big part of the, how to get us into pride and all of the polarization when it comes to the red and the blue and this leader and that leader. And one of the things I want to get deep into, by the way, just because it's so in our face right now, so relevant, is immigration. But before we do that, I just want to check in with the chat. These are wonderful people who have been here, and I just want to see if there's anything that you want to respond to. So, for what?
I think that was a response to somebody else making a comment in the chat.
Talking to yourselves a little bit there, which is fun. And retired Trump despiser, all the bio reads, an old family's friend website has lived such a successful, financially and emotionally rich life. Yeesh, I haven't went to that one. Anyway, I should, let's see. If you guys can repeat if there was any like actual questions. Michelle is saying, do you trust your senses? Yes, no. Why? Deprogramming leads to much clearer process of sense data. No reprogramming required. That's my platform. Thank you, Michelle, for adding that. Do you have a sense of that around do we need to reprogram, or like in my paradigm, it's all deprogramming. Just take away what's not us, and us is left.
Yeah, I think there's there's probably a number of ways of approaching the problem that will bear fruit. Because as long as we recognize that the problem is the fact that we misdiagnose what our identity is as being too enmeshed in the particulars of the either sensory data, the imprints that create conditioned thoughts, looping thoughts, false stories that we tell ourselves, because we tell ourselves stories, right? Like we're the creature that tells stories. That's a beautiful thing, and that's part of how we're able to triangulate into causality beyond the sensory domain. It's a fantastic attribute, but the problem is there's a lot of false stories. There's a lot of the destructive ways of telling a tale that on a small scale or on a big scale will do us damage and undermine our potential as far as reading into things too much. And we all have experiences where we've allowed a piece of jealousy in our mind or an insecurity color how we interpret, hey, why did that person say that thing? Why did that person look at that guy or that girl? And why did they so we will often do things that then create these snowballing loopy problems that make it increasingly impossible to live a happy life or to resolve a problem or to have friendships or relationships that are worth something. So sometimes we have to take a step back, dislodge a little bit from a lot of the prejudices that are causing us to loop. And that means whether you want to think about it as a deprogramming. I know for me, like if you've got an addiction, there's certain things you want to deprogram. Like if I used to be addicted to smoking. I was addicted to social media that was holding me back from developing my mind. So for some people, if it's a serious addiction, yeah, you have to just sort of cut yourself off, like go through a cleanse, and whether that means getting an Airbnb for a month, you might have to do something so extreme, right? Where you just don't allow yourself to access those triggers that cause you to fall into your patterns. That could be considered maybe partially the deprogramming aspect of it. But you have to give yourself always something. I was saying, I was thinking, I alluded to the violent video games or the addiction to dystopic horror movies and shows, or even terrible music, this satanic music that, again, it can can cause an addiction. People find pleasure and comfort in these things, or drugs, and a lot of this comes. So for the music and the stories that we watch on Netflix or wherever else, we still need music and stories. You can't just take it away and leave our souls with nothing. But I think it's training. We've been so induced to suckle on McDonald's that we forgot what a healthy meal is supposed to taste like. We've lost the taste for what healthy, nutritious, and tasty, but more subtly tasty food is actually supposed to be. We want the immediate mass explosion of endorphins right now. And that usually results in regret in the future. So the type of pleasures that are real pleasures don't come with an associated regret. They come with both pleasure and a sustained pleasure, like in the sense that it won't be tied to regret. It's more associated with, I guess, in that sense, wisdom. But it requires we educate our palate, and that includes the palate of the mouth, the audio senses of the types of music that we train. So I would suggest people, who maybe not, a lot of people, because classical music has either been so badly performed, there's been so many, not everything classical is even good, like there's a lot of crap classical music too. It's not all equal, but maybe to help retrain the ears, to give ourselves, and it requires sort of making ourselves kind of referees of our own, the way I see it, like no one's going to come in and do this for us. We have to kind of like be our own kind of referee and like manage ourselves, which is a weird idea. Like we're both the servant and the master of ourselves. So we have to kind of, at first, I think, before we learn to take joy in these things, because we won't necessarily find pleasure in reading a Shakespeare play, which takes effort. We might even get tired and sleepy, or trying to watch Shakespeare performed. At first, you're probably not going to understand a lot of what's being said, but you'll see that there's something going on that is worth the effort to focus. And over time, you start enjoying it more and more if you're doing it in an active way. It's the same thing for the music. And so you want to start maybe with some folk music by, let's say, Paul Robeson or Marian Anderson, something that's a little bit more simple beauties that then can expand into things that are more challenging, and but definitely, I mean, it's a different thing for everybody. I'd be curious to see your approach and your techniques that you help people with is definitely a fascinating thing. How do you do it? How do you encourage people to break their patterns and to reprogram from bad paths?
Well, I have the paradigm, and so far it's been reliable that we have all the programming that we need. Say, if you can call it programming, direct from our creator as a creation, that we were installed with everything we need. Now, that won't include the way that we show up in the likeness of the creator to create. This is my whole subject right now, creator code. I feel like I need to have about 27 conversations with you, by the way. So I'm trying to titrate, like where not to go all at the same time. And but to me, that so we have everything we need, and this is how it actually works. Whether I'm describing reality or not, it does work. Maybe as a technique more so. It's just by letting go of the programming. Now we call that word the lie, the propaganda, the image of reality that's not true. That's not it. We interact with that and program ourselves. So it's an internal experience that it's like you said, the servant and the master, that we put the programming in charge of us out of desperate measures. When, infants, babies, they could not be successful in gaining their basic needs for love, control, and safety. Mm-hmm. And because it's a highly weaponized birth and raising of children and the education of children, then it feeds right into the programming. So we put the programs in charge of us. It's backwards. We should be in charge of the programming. It's actually needs our instruction, just like if you let a dog or a child run the family, things don't go well. They need the adults to show up and give direction out of the higher mind that can discriminate and see the difference in that state. So I won't belabor it, but the most important thing is motive, right? So so whatever the expression that becomes part of our cultural environment, was it created driven by some kind of fear, or was it a pure creation? You talk about, and I appreciate this, that our creator is inherently good.
Mm.
I'll say we have a pure source compared to the dualists out there that will try to say, oh, it's, the good and the bad, and they have to coexist, and you can't have one without the other crap. Like that is such,
Yeah.
don't get me started on that.
No, I know.
But where you're coming from determines it, are you letting yourself create and change culture and stand up and fight the righteous fight out of a place that's driven by fear that reinforces and strengthens your programming? Or could you come from a pure place out of the bravery of deprogramming, letting the fear go that we've put in charge of us, that we think it's saving our life, but it's really, dulling and killing people. When you run the program that you're afraid not to be in control, you get a whole population full of out of control people,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
When you run that program that you need love and approval, and then you go and you create great works out of the need for love and approval, which to me is totally replete in the arts world. That's why it's full of sick people.
Yes.
They're not happy. I don't care how beautiful or profound or moving. So you can move me. So what? I can move myself. Those things move. That's what it's a scale of emotion on a moving scale. So this is my quest to have enough people get to a place of being able to create from a pure place, just by taking away, the analogy of the sculpture, that the sculptor knows the sculpture is in the wood or the clay. They just remove what's not the sculpture.
Yeah, they're just releasing or liberating the sculpture from the marble or whatever. Yeah, no, it's a good philosophy, and I think that's very much something that's in my heart too. And I've noticed that pattern, that same set of insights that you've expressed uniquely in your own words is the same thing that whenever I've read the original writings of anybody who contributed something long eternal in their life's works to humanity, have all drawn from that very same well of insights and see things like the idea of education as being not simply putting information into somebody or programming somebody like a machine or a blank slate that can be like written upon from the outside, but are rather inspiring and kindling a fire from that's already, you have faith that it's already there, that all babies are good, that everybody has that latent fire that yearns to be hot and to grow. And sometimes it just requires a little bit of effort at the very beginning to awaken it, to kindle it, to inspire it, but there's that sense that all of our words have responsibilities. All of our artistic productions are not just for our egos. They're also, sure, we always have an ego, but I mean, it's not for the ego. You don't take, it's not done for the self alone. It's also done for the consequences of what you are going to be affecting. Are you going to be dampening that fire in the people who will be affected by the works that you do and the words that you say, or are you going to be helping and awakening that fire and helping people actualize their potential because of the words you say and the life, the model, what type of modeling you do in the course of your life, and the let's say you're a poet or whatever, what type of artistry you do. So there's like that sense that, okay, I have these freedoms to be creative, but the freedoms come with responsibilities. And I think that's like the healthy state of mind of, like, I was taking some jabs at the beginning of people who have a lower idea of false freedom that's associated with my freedom to do whatever I want to do. I can buy the drugs, I can buy the pizza, I can buy whatever box of cereal of thousands of flavors that I want, and thus I have freedom. And it's like, no, that's not really freedom, because that doesn't come at all with responsibility. The higher freedoms always have that, and they have to, again, be fought for in that sense too. But I did the idea that we are our own maestro in that sense. Like we have to harmonize our own soul as best as we can. We'll never be perfectly harmonized. We'll never be angels, but we're always trying to get better, and we get better by also helping others. It's a reciprocal thing, and we help others. the act of going outside of ourselves to others also helps ourselves, and vice versa. And the more we help ourselves, the more we're empowered to do more for others, both in our lives, and that will hopefully endure beyond our lives. And as far as resonance is concerned, right, to greater, and the better we get at that, the more work we do, the greater our amplitude can be in the broader scheme of the universe as a whole, is my philosophy is in general. And what you said about this idea that we're all like participating in creation. I think you're making some allusion to the fact that we're living in a creative process. The universe itself is creating. It's a living thing. We all, if we choose to, can participate in that flow, in a positive way. And if we fall into, I think that's the thing with the oligarchy, is they get us into state. There's tricks that have been built up over many generations to dislodge us from that natural state, which tricks us with certain false arguments, well, sometimes called sophistry, right? Like arguments that are made to wear the appearance of truth without actually being true. And one of the aspects of it involves these assumptions that to have goodness, you require evil, like you said, right? This Manichaean dualistic assumption. A lot of people believe it. If you want to think like an oligarch, adopt that thinking. That's how the oligarchs actually have wired their own internal culture, which is sick. That any type of good is only the consequence of evil. So to awaken good, you have to do evil. And then evil becomes, because evil is the cause of good, evil becomes raised in its elevation of value to being more important than good. Good is actually maybe not even true. Maybe it's not even a thing in their mind. It's evil is the good. And then you merge the profane and the sacred, increasingly the ugliness and the beautiful, and increasingly you're drinking baby blood or whatever. And I mean, I don't know exactly how that happens, but that, like, whether it's the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, all of these, like these cults all presume ultimately they have different models, but they all have the common theme of like assuming that darkness and lies and evil has an actual substance to it that counterbalances the good in some balance. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at it from the standpoint of a Plato or an Augustine or this tradition that thinks differently than that, then you're like, no, that's an illusion. The lower realm of the material reality of the becoming, as Plato called the lower reality of becoming that we live in, where things are bounded in space, they're bounded in time. There's a beginning and an end of objects, and that includes the material part of ourselves that has the senses. That that realm of becoming, of the flow, has opposites. There's fast and slow, and light and dark, and great and small. Those are truly opposite things, things that you'll find in that realm. But when you go to the higher realm of the being, the principles that don't change, whether justice or whether goodness or beauty, in their principled idea that we'll never perfectly know 100%, but in their essential character, the thing we thought of as the opposite of goodness or the opposite of beauty or the opposite of let's say light, which is darkness, is actually, when you think about it, and it's not a positive, it's the absence of the principle. It's not a thing unto itself. It's no matter how much darkness you could bring into a room that has candles, the dark, you can't do that. The candles will always emit the light. You could snuff the candles out and there's now an absence of light, and so it's appearing dark, but there's no force of darkness, whereas you could bring in the force of light into a dark room and all of a sudden transform it. And the same thing for all of the virtues. Their opposites are the absence of the virtue. It's not that the vices are co-equivalent to the virtues on some symmetry of the universe at all. But it takes some. It's not something that one can just say and believe. You have to test it out, and that's sort of, I think, what a good education should be doing. A good culture should help us reconfirm that notion that the principles of the universe are fundamentally good, that we participate in those, that we can access those eternal principles within ourselves, within our soul, that are eternal, that are immortal, as our soul must also be, because we can know them, and thus we can develop, I think, a more healthy identity that could allow us to discern what is right, what is wrong, where is the fallacies in things that appear right or appear popular, but where's the Trojan horses? Because we have an internal standard of eternal truths and goodness and beauty, we would be in a better place to be able to discern where we're going wrong, where we're slipping ourselves into a false path and pull ourselves back into a better path. All of those things would be there. But again, there's a lot of work designed to cripple those powers of discernment, which it's unfortunate, but it's actually a lot easier. I've noticed in dealing with people that I've encountered who are wrestling with these ideas. It's a lot easier to tap back into that than it is to dislodge us from it in the long run,
Right. Because that's working with rather than against nature, which the whole field of opposites and the manufacturer. I actually just gave a talk at Norcabogo last year on the marriage of the opposites, and I made it a little PhD for myself just because I really wanted to dive in. And it's the same conclusions that there's no there's just light. There's no dark. It's just the absence of light. And you can see how powerfully light will bust. If you try to sleep in the dark, there's always some little crack of something that makes its way. It's really funny to watch that. I think this is one of the biggest cultural psyops, and I'm so curious. I didn't even plan to talk about this, but let's do it. All of our media, the stories, everything. Back to the hero's journey, by the way, that I think that it's very dangerous to the powers that be. They need to mangle that story. They need to appeal to people's more hedonistic self-fulfillment pursuits rather than knowing that it's going to be a way of creating for the future, for generations, for contribution. This is our deepest soul's hunger, in my opinion. And it's why there are levels of freedom, some that won't go there when you just get the cereal brand that you like and you call it freedom. So I just wanted to say that the big psyop that I think is there is portraying a war between the good and the evil, treating evil to be an entity of its own self, not just an absence of good, which is to me more likely. And then Mark Archer, who's an author in the House of Free Will, by the way, that is my private association. He talks about that the real war is between life and death, and that's what the portrayed war between good and evil is trying to obscure, so we don't take on the real war, and that's exactly what it is, right? We're in it. By my estimates, we are in a death cult that has glorified and aggrandized evil, like you were just saying, all of that, needing it to be part of the psychic equation.
Yes.
But if we can tap into the life and the death, what gives life, what drains life, kind of thing. So
I totally agree with you. That's actually like, so I published a book last year called Science and Shackled. Here, actually,
show us, please.
It's called Restoring Causality to a World in Chaos.
Take it down so we can see better.
Oh, like so. Here's Science and Shackled. So that's the book, and yeah, like I decided that what you just expressed is how I chose to open the whole thing with the first chapter called "Does Life or Death Govern the Universe? The Metaphysics of Geopolitics." Wow. Because that's so important. I think at the heart of everything, and you're right. Like this death cult, everything operates on faith, right? Like we'll never know the universe, we'll never know everything, we'll never know absolutely these higher principles in their absolute sense, and that's perfectly good because if we could, there would be no room for improvement. There would be no room for perfectibility. Would be a non-existent thing. We'd basically be like angels with no free will. We'd be like automatons, robots, right? And then without the free will, without the tension of, or the temptation, even, there would be nothing to overcome. There'd be no purpose for freedom, for liberty, which comes always as the consequence of a tension being resolved through a love of something better. There'd be no purpose for beauty, even, right? Which you couldn't appreciate a painting if all we had was light and we had no shade. You need these nuances, these colors. So, you know, there is there's a way to interpret the opposites that is a healthy one, and I think the opposite of life and death is something which the oligarchy, because it operates under Manichaean principles, it sees evil as more important, or the cause of the good as a thing unto itself, that you can even get, you know, people who have looked into the occult underpinnings shaping a lot of the really bad things that happen to humanity. You'll find very, very nasty ideas of Aleister Crowley and you know, Eliphas Levi and other occultists who are trying to invoke demons to do their bidding, that are part of their operations, that usher in things like their organization of world wars, like World War I. You can't account for why that happened if you don't look at these artificial intelligence operations that involve these occultists like Aleister Crowley, who was a British intelligence operative helping to organize psyops that would persuade Americans that that they had to enter World War I. And he's the, you know, if you want to look at why the German U-boat blew up the Lusitania as sort of a 9/11 kind of operation in 1915, it had a lot to do with Aleister Crowley working to deliver the messages to his German occult counterparts that informed them that there were weapons being carried on this passenger ship, making it not a neutral passenger ship, but one that is part of the war and liable to get shot down. But that would then feed back into the propaganda campaign that Crowley was a part of moving to convince Americans that they had to consent to jumping into this bankers' war. But the guys, that's not different or separate from these crazy ass rituals that he's doing on Long Island of Babylon workings and trying to invoke, you know, the different demons to do things. It's not separate in his mind or from the operation. Now, we are told after the fact that World War I is evidence why humanity is just naturally dysfunctional, why we're naturally warlike, naturally selfish, why if we tolerate nation states, they will always go to war with their neighbors. Look at the case of World War I or World War II. Bullshit, right? That was not a natural phenomenon that emerged. That was done because you had sociopaths who are crazy who invoked it, and then they're convincing us that it's because humans and we've, you know, are just what we are, that these bloodbaths happen. And so the solution is to give up nation states and give up our liberties for one world governments to keep us all secure and transcendent. Bullshit. Again, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah. But then, like the thing that the oligarchy is, they themselves want to project a story that I think ultimately they know is not true. They know the universe is ultimately animated by goodness and life. They have enough evidence that they have access to show them that this is true, because discoveries that they try to suppress were made in ways that were only possible because the people who made those discoveries, let's say Johannes Kepler or Gottfried Leibniz or Christian Huygens, and anybody who makes the big discoveries of principle, if you look at the method that they use a method that has a profound faith in the goodness of God's creation, the fact that we're living in a living, creative, loving universe. That faith is there in the heart of a Max Planck. It's embedded in all of his writings. So even though the oligarchy has to read those writings, and I'm talking about those upper echelon game masters, they have to read those writings in order to both identify the danger as well as the usefulness, because they like, here's an irony I also encountered over my 20 years of researching this, is that the oligarchy, though they can't do creative discoveries, and they're threatened by creative discoveries, they still want to use the creative discoveries when they're made. Like if you ask, you know, the ruling oligarchs of Europe, would you like to do without the electricity that your system could not have discovered? They would say no, they like the electricity, but they don't want to allow the thing that allows it to happen. They don't want to allow the Benjamin Franklin quality of mind and soul to emerge that allows for those eurekas of the nature of electricity to happen and then to be transmitted to the fellow slaves to be elevated to a higher way of thinking. So they do go out of their way to spin tales. Both you see it in science, as I go through in my book, that entropy, you know, the second law of thermodynamics, is something that we have to pay fealty to if we want to be respected scientists or get published in peer-reviewed journals or whatever. We have to assume that that's true. But what is that? Well, that's a garbage theory that was cooked up at the late 19th century that presumed that the rules of localized thermodynamics that one might find in, let's say, a steam engine or a little fire on a match. It's a little fire, like a little match with a fire on it. It's a thermodynamic process. There's something being burned, energy being used up to create a fire that emits a certain amount of heat. That if you apply it to do something, it could do work. It could boil water, make steam, make pressure, make a turbine hit, make electrons move. So you can do things that result in a power of action, but the matchstick is limited, right? So at a certain point, that heat you can get out of it is going to grow, and then it's going to quickly decline like a bell curve, and then it's going to dissipate into nothingness. There will be a heat death to the match, to the steam engine that only has a limited amount of fuel, and that's fine. Those are perfectly fine uses of thermodynamic science on a localized level. But what they then did is, under the Royal Society, people like Rudolf Clausius and Grossman and Ludwig Boltzmann, but these different imperial scientists were pumped up because they had doctrines that interpreted those localized experiences of the rules of thermodynamics on the small scale, and they scaled it up to the entire universe. And they said, well, we can thus assume, without ever having proven it, because it's improvable, that these things are the way the entire universe itself is working, which presumes some moment that we must imagine must have existed before which there was a universe, and how we interpret whether it's the red shifts or the blue shifts of the various solar systems or galaxies that we encounter when we look at a telescope, or a spectrometer that's tied to a telescope that shows us, that the light spectrums of different galaxies are shifted a little bit more to the blue side or the red side. We have to interpret that from this second law of thermodynamics, this entropy mindset, that will thus assume that it must be, well, the Doppler effect, which is something that one would see of, let's say, everyone knows that. I think everyone's been through high school physics class, but the Doppler effect is, just the idea that if something is moving away from you that's emitting light or sound, that as the sound or light is hitting the person experiencing it, it will be more elongated waves, versus if that object is moving towards us, it'll be more compressed waves, meaning it would be moving in the blue towards the blue end of the light spectrum if something emitting light is moving towards us, and if it's moving away, it'll be more elongated waves moving towards the red end of the spectrum. And so that's how they interpreted, against the better judgment of Edwin Hubble, who was the person actually observing for the first time the redshift phenomenon. He was saying, well, don't necessarily leap to conclusions. He was telling this to these young pups, these young mathematicians who were all being brainwashed by entropy, and paying fealty to this new sort of secular religion. He was saying, like, don't just assume that that the Doppler effect is the cause of why you're seeing that sensory data. Keep your mind open to other ways of interpreting it. But they didn't listen to him. Only one person who was serious, who was his prize student, did take him seriously, Halton Arp, who was like the best astrophysicist in the Cambridge Observatory in the 1960s and 70s, until he started taking Edwin Hubble's advice seriously and interpreting these anomalies, because he was discovering that there's a shit ton of anomalies in the different galaxies that we see. And he found he produced in 1969, and it made him a lot of enemies, the Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies. And you can still get it online with pictures that he pulled together, hundreds and hundreds of images of these different galaxies that were right side by side each other. And even though they're so close together, they have these radically different redshifts, that if the Doppler effect is how we assume the differentiation of redshifts are happening, they must be presumed to be hundreds or thousands of light years apart from each other. But yet, here's this paradox, that all of these cases have these filamentary structures connecting these galaxies, a big one and a small one always, oftentimes with little quasars, which are supposed to be the things that have the biggest redshifts in the whole wide world, are quasars. And we're told that that's because they're moving the fastest away from us, and they're the furthest away from us of anything that exists. However, in a disproportionately, a statistically impossible large amount of these cases that he puts forth in his Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies that he re-updates several times in the next 40 years. He died in 2013. You got these little quasars embedded within the filamentary structures between a larger, lower redshift and a smaller, higher redshift galaxy with two quasars in between. You're like, what the hell is going on? And so he was of the view that there's an intrinsic redshift that likely has more to do with the living organic nature of the galaxies seeding other galaxies or birthing other galaxies in a sense. And in that sense, you could just it's revolutionary in my mind. And again, he lost his job, he got iced out, put to the sidelines, as is often the case, but he still developed quite the following of serious astronomers who are more like creative, which kept his ideas alive and accessible today. And I have a chapter on him in my book. But it's like what the implications are is that no, that it's not that this death of entropy that's moving us towards this imaginary predictive heat death where nothing new is ever going to happen in whatever several trillion years, which ultimately means what's it all worth? What's the point of anything in the big picture of things if we're all animated by a giant heat death of the universe? Well, he's like, no, actually that implies that the cluster of galaxies that our Milky Way is located in, because there's these constellations of galaxies, that those few galaxies that seem to have a blue shift, like Andromeda, which is like, I don't know, I'm not sure how many light years away from us, but it's not that far. That means that it's not necessarily going to crash into us as we're being told by, people reading Standard Scientific American or whatever. Actually, that wouldn't be the case at all. That would mean that it might be a lot closer to us on the one hand. Number two, it might be that blue shift is that it's the mother galaxy. It's the parent galaxy of what produced M34 and these other Seyfert galaxies that we are one of many of those, in this cluster. So it totally, again, revives a hope and optimism that actually life governs and tempers the flow of the universe, that the universe may not actually have external boundary conditions itself. Like, because under the entropy model, where nothing was supposed to have existed 14 billion years ago, an infinite expanse of nothingness somehow generated everythingness out of some like singularity of some Big Bang moment, which we only calculate because we can extrapolate mathematically the Doppler effect of the redshifts, right? It's to some imaginary point when everything was together, which like, well, maybe that didn't happen. And then it's like, but then and then from there, everything moved outward like a big balloon expanding. And it's like, well, what are you moving into, right? Did you come out of nothing in time and now you're moving into nothing? That everything that we have that is something is actually being encapsulated by infinite nothingness, out of which at the end of the day, we're going to return back to that natural order of nothingness. And this is all a big, giant cosmic sick joke. No, I think that's that. And that then feeds into and colors how the management of artistic policy, educational policy, everything is going to be tempered by those fake pseudoscientific notions that become hegemonic, that then encourage, like I was working at a university in Montreal for a bit, and they had these annual events unifying arts and science, and what these events were called to get the engineering students and the artistic students to work together to produce works of art that would then be put on display in events. It's a good idea, but it was called entropy, and so and it wouldn't be a surprise that when you go into their exhibitions and vernissages, you get sick to your stomach. Art became something that became a devotional, a prayer to the church of entropy. Of anything that showcased decay, rot, became good. And that would be what caused the student to get elevated in their prestige and would advance. And maybe if they continued to develop their skills at expressing rot, they would get the big grants, right? And so and then you go into the economics departments and the sociology departments, and you shouldn't be surprised to find on the walls, those paintings that are permitted on the walls are the most disgusting Jackson Pollock-esque types of just deconstructive ugliness. So these people whose work as economists is going to influence the lives of millions or billions of people have no ability to cultivate a higher love or the higher sentiments of being able to find the love and beauty in human beings that would normally temper your decisions as an economist of like, are you doing something that's going to increase the bounty of food production, or are you going to destroy it? Right? It's not even a thought in their minds, so it all feeds right back into each other in that sense.
That's brilliant. Wow, amazing. You're just a walking encyclopedia, having not just a source of information, but like having really integrated and brought so much together. I might have to break down and read all your books.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. I'm very picky with that. Yeah, it's man. If we had about 6 hours right now, I would probably try to respond to that. And I'm gonna be synthesizing. I'm hoping that this won't be our last chance to speak together, because I know a lot's going to come out of this.
For sure. No, I'd be happy to anytime this is. I mean, it's hard to just. It's good soul food, right? Just to be able to have an opportunity to talk about ideas that are of this caliber. There's so few opportunities during our day to day where we can just do that. So I really appreciate this greatly.
Fantastic! I'm so glad.
Maybe we could do something at Julian's place at some point. Yes. Are you based in Ontario?
No.
Oh. Okay. Right.
Yeah, same country, but I'm 2,000 miles or so to the west.
Oh, are you in Alberta or in Vancouver?
Manitoba.
Manitoba.
2,000 kilometers is more accurate than miles. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, my spatial sense is weak. Okay, so that's a bit of a drive to get to Julian's spot. Okay,
but I will go. I will go if he invites us. So yeah.
All right, sweet. Nice.
Put him in a headlock.
That's a little message to Julian if you're watching out there. Right, we're waiting for your invite.
Exactly. I already intimated towards. I'm like, oh, your barn is so beautiful. I see myself there. So yeah, working on it. Let's see. I would like to look at, first of all, this really important question, because you've talked about it, how it's appearing to be some organic thing that, like, say, in the case of World War I, humans are just savages. They need to be controlled and regulated, or they're going to destroy itself. To what degree would you say that our culture has grown organically in spite of the engineering towards those certain kind of trajectories? That I'll use the Canadian convoy, truckers convoy. Did you tune in with that at all?
Oh, I went down. I just see with my own eyes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good for you. I'm not surprised you were right there. And so there was a certain organic nature to that. Nobody expected the grandma and the grandpa and all the grandkids to show up from the Hutterite colony to support the truckers and bring gobs of food to the what's Deacon's Corner, where the truckers go by. It was miraculous. Like, I just gave myself good shivers seeing all of that. People just come out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Now, the movement was very co-opted, and it could have been easily engineered from the get-go, but there was something inorganic in it. So how do you see that? To what degree does, and I'll say, the human spirit inject itself into that death cult's plan for us?
That's a wonderful question. And I think anybody listening to our conversation up until this point would not be surprised to hear me state that the oligarchy cannot genuinely create. They can only co-opt. They can steal, but they can't create. And they can make the things that they steal appear to be things that they did, but it's not true, and they couldn't have done it.
Just like AI is a good example of that these days, right? Like, it's creating these huge bodies of work. Quick example, and then when you hear it, it's like, that's empty. I don't care. It's like good. It's good singing. It's good composition. It's good everything, but it's empty, dead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, and sometimes they know that the consequence of their stifling, suffocating system that demands total obedience, the destruction of creativity, of conscience, they know that it will result in upsurges in opposition, because they kind of have a certain sense that they're dealing with a species that craves freedom, as are as our essential oxygen of the soul.
Mm.
But they try to create outlets for that to be expressed. Now, there's cases that we have in, let's say, India. Like if you look at the India Congress Party in the 1885 period when it was created, that's a Congress Party that was created by British imperialists who were devoted followers of Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists, like this guy Alexander Octavian Hume, who's a high-level Malthusian, sociopathic British civil servant who creates the India Congress Party in 1885, and he's a Theosophist. And you're like, he opened, there's letters where he's writing to the British Home Office saying, like, I'm doing this to create a pressure valve. That's why I'm doing this. That's all. But despite and so here's the good and the bad, right? In that particular case, the idea was, well, you've got all of these different freedom movements of Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and, Zoroastrians in India who have all suffered the abuses of the British Empire and their genocidal ways of controlled famines for over 2 centuries. And they're getting uppity. They're starting to organize. They're organizing more and more. You had the 1858 Indian Uprising, which is a massive one. Like, and again, no divides, cultural divides. It was people who are at the totally different religions working together for their common humanity against an oppressive force. And it was only getting more and more unmanageable. And they were getting the support also. The Indian freedom movements were getting the support at the time of a lot of American and even Russian humanists who were like, let's help you. Let's like help you get your freedom. And some of them had duplicitous motives. Other ones were really genuinely good human beings who later on rallied around the figure of like Abraham Lincoln and Alexander II in Russia. And the empires, it's like a fight. It's an ongoing dance in a sense. And the oligarchy was, okay, they had this bright idea to say, okay, well, let's try to create a new freedom movement that will absorb as many of these different groups that want to destroy us, and we'll try to then co-opt and control how they behave afterwards. To a certain degree, they were very effective and they did a lot of damage. Like I think the Indian revolutionary independence movement was supposed to be could have been and should have been much more glorious than it was, because a lot of these Theosophics and Fabians infused their fallacious narratives into brainwashing those who should have been thinking on a higher level into accommodating debates for, let's say, like, give me local rule. In Canada's case, it was like, we want responsible government. And it's like, well, wait, what happened? Weren't we just like fighting for freedom in 1837 and 38? Wasn't it supposed to be like freedom? And all of a sudden our patriotic movements of 1837, 38 of Papineau and Mackenzie get put down. That all of a sudden the British comes in, they write the Durham Report under Lord, John Russell. And all of a sudden after 1840, we're told, no, you're allowed to fight, of course, for your freedoms. You can fight for those things. And sure, that's your right to do that. But it has to be for responsible government, right? So all of a sudden people are fighting for what does that even mean? We want the right to have a government that is responsible and obedient to ultimately the interests of the British Empire. That became the new rallying call for freedom lovers. Like, what the fuck? So that was a fail. That was a big fail. And a lot of people in India got the same thing. That being said, a lot of very good people who also broke from the mold found themselves operating within those structures and were able to create a space that even the empire would have preferred to keep control of India and even break down India into more sub fighting groups under British control for much longer. And that didn't work out. So the human factor still seems to always creep up and disrupt the empire's formulas for control. And I think with the Freedom Convoy, it's a case where, yeah, you had these nefarious actors who were trying to influence it. I think that's partially why they set up early on, these various pallets full of bricks. And we saw people who luckily had cell phones and were always recording and astutely getting good. They had good wisdom animating their instincts that even though they were the RCMP and the Canadian, like the Ottawa's enforcement mechanisms were threatened to make, to steal their food, to take away your heating oil.
Gas.
Yeah, and they were even threatening, to take away their kids as well. Like there was a certain messaging that was designed to make people pick up those bricks and throw them at police cars, throw them at governmental buildings, and nobody did it. Nobody fell for the bait. There was people who were assigned to go in as provocateurs, like we saw on January the 7th, like to promote and encourage hotheads to get violent. People didn't buy them. They didn't fall for it. Even, and people showed up with Nazi regalia, with mask, first of all, which is a sign that there's something dishonest about them, because you're at a freedom convoy and you're wearing a mask. But with like swastikas and Canadian flags and fuck Trudeau, signs, and they were immediately iced out. So all of those efforts, I think, to turn it into a violent movement failed, and the deeper human qualities won the day in that case. And we saw the immediate consequence very quickly after finally the thing ended. The powers in Ottawa had to realize that it was that there was something that they couldn't just impose their will as they thought they could, and they had to immediately pull back all of those tyrannical, draconian policies very quickly. And we saw the same thing with Martin Luther King, right? Martin Luther King Jr. It was somebody who we saw that the Rockefeller Foundation had wanted to gain influence and co-opt and redirect his civil rights movement. There were certain grants that the Rockefeller Foundation even gave to his civil rights movement, with the hope that they could then use that as a way to get closer to and to shape the policy that Martin Luther King had, which ultimately didn't work at the end of the day while he was alive. So they were, he was able to do things like the Children's March in Selma, Alabama, and other things that were brilliant creative maneuvers, and that started uniting the fight for civil rights against the KKK operations that were being protected by J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, that was giving massive protection to the white supremacist, Nazi KKK operations amongst the Jim, promoting the Jim Crow laws of the South, which are still there, by the way. Like these networks, they didn't disappear.
Wow.
And he did a very good job, but he began to move that into a fight against global empire and for global economic cooperation and development and justice. And that's when he became a real threat around 1967 against the Vietnam War, for global economic cooperation, for peace in the world, as well as for civil rights that were tied to the fight to liberate Africa from colonialism. So that all started converging in something that we could learn from strategically as a Tao, kind of like a way of thinking that is highly potent, because the empire, at the end of the day, I'll just say it this way, they hate killing individuals. And I can't say this enough. In my research, they don't mind at all killing millions of people, but they despise having to kill individuals, because an individual is just a weak person. It's just like, why would they need to eliminate a person like a John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King or a Gandhi or whomever? Because if people actually look into it, they begin to realize that there's something that we're all individuals, and that there's something that an individual who thinks and feels and develop and uses their time in a certain way can begin to tap into a source that can make them a threat to this ancient, monstrous behemoth that's been latched on parasitically, which wants to portray itself as if it's like God, or like gods that there's no point fighting back against, but they're actually more insecure than they would have us believe. And when they kill an individual, one risks creating martyrs. Two, it gives insight into what is that person doing who got killed. Like what were their policies? What was their idea? What are their speeches? What is the philosophy of these people? And then that runs the risk then of all sorts of nonlinear consequences of people in all parts of the world at all times in history beginning to reawaken within themselves those things that made Martin Luther King Jr. a phenomenon. So again, that's sort of my musings about the whole trucker convoy experience as a whole, because you're right. It's like it was a mixture, right, of like nefarious operatives. There's things we could have talked about with the American Revolution too, that turned out ultimately good, though. You'll find that there were agencies that were very bad trying to co-opt it and use it to create a different kind of effect than what had happened. So yeah, that's history. It's just more interesting than we've been led to believe.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow, great answer. I'm loving this. So with the time remaining today, I have to stop on the hour. I would love to approach how immigration is currently, you want to say, I don't want to say black pill destroying our society, but it certainly can look and feel like that on a regular basis. So I know you here in Canada are seeing what I'm seeing. What's your take on all of that?
We have to be so careful on this one because it's so layered with fallacy. Because it's true that immigration has been weaponized, a la Kalergi plan and everything else. That's all true. That being said, it's been done the way it's been done in order to create an effect that would have us fall into a certain set of behavioral patterns that have always resulted. They're very predictable for those who live in those countries that are being infused with all sorts of immigrants from abroad, some of whom are very bad people, some of whom have done terrible things in Syria or in Ukraine or in Latin America or in Africa, and are now here, right? The effects of what we will do is predictively programmed, and it's very much understood, which is to ultimately induce violence, to ultimately induce a bigotry in our own minds, a tribalism, which is also what they want to create. That's what also helped create and codify and solidify the early fascist mindsets of Germany and other European countries by those same bankers that were both funding fascism as well as Bolshevism at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that, these left-right dichotomies are controlled dialectics. And so when you look at the George Soros operations behind a lot of the open border policies that have done so much damage, it's partially tied to the fact that most of these people who are coming in to our countries, number one, would prefer to be in their countries of Libya and Syria and Africa if we hadn't bombed them back to the Stone Age or Iraq or Afghanistan. The reason why they're here is because we've made their countries part. So it's a lot of this is on us. We've allowed our military industrial complex to destroy their countries in NATO wars and other things. Right. Now they don't have economies, so we've destroyed. And on top of the destroyed economies, we then allowed our intelligence agencies that killed our JFKs, that killed our Martin Luther Kings, to go and run operations to fund and groom and weaponize armed Islamicists in these countries to be used as instruments of the CIA to topple Bashar al-Assad or Gaddafi or other leaders that we don't like, as instruments of the West that we built up. We provided the money, the weapons, the training centers. Some of them we even brought to North American bases to be trained, then to be sent back to Afghanistan or other parts of the world to then go and fight to overthrow the governments that we want to. So all of this stuff, right? We kind of did that. And now the consequences are what they are. You got a whole bunch of people. Most of them are not bad people, but there's bad people within who are being infused to play a disruptive role within a condition which wouldn't be a big deal if we actually had economic abundance. If we actually had an economy that was not set up to fail, we could absorb a lot of people, as we did with, the give us your poor, give us your weak, Statue of Liberty days from over a century ago. We could do that, but we can't do that because our economy has been designed to atrophy and decay to the point that we're living increasingly in scarcity. So now we got scarcity exacerbated by more people willing to do cheaper work, cheaper labor, who are getting more privileges by government handouts and other things to reward them just to be here, not even necessarily have to work, and we're being fed drugs to pacify us, whether legal or whether otherwise, whatever. We got a drug economy too. So on every level, it's bad. And I think from my standpoint, it's like when I hear most people debate this within the conservative media complex, it ignores everything I just said. It's just like, immigrants are here, they want to take our stuff. They couldn't make life work for them no matter how much money we gave them in their countries. Now they're here, these freeloading like subhumans. It's creating this us, that the thing we were talking about with the Trump derangement syndrome versus the lefts, and inversely, it's creating that us versus other dishuman, uberhuman type of tribalism, which always leads to 30 years war effects. And we have to redirect, I think, our thinking towards the more subtle, bigger contextual dynamics that we could have, and maybe we could still do something about if we talk about it. But we don't talk about what is the role of CSIS and the RCMP in sponsoring and grooming radicalized jihadis, like the RCMP was caught doing in 2016 in orchestrating an attempted terrorist plot on Canada Day in Victoria, and they got caught entrapping these two idiot white people into this, crime cell, this Islamist crime cell, and everybody except those two idiots were all informants for the RCMP and CSIS, helping to radicalize them, brainwash them, provide them the blueprints to make the bombs, the directions on where to put the bombs. And then the RCMP comes in and busts them up, proving like, oh, great, go patriotic Canadian intelligence services, and then the case is overthrown a year later because the Superior Court says, well, actually, you kind of entrap them. It's kind of illegal. But they didn't stop. I don't see any evidence that they stopped doing that. So, or CSIS getting caught having created the white supremacist heritage front under Grant Bristol, who's like one of the only white supremacist organizations of Canada, which its founder and the guy who ran it was also a CSIS agent in the 1990s. And then, they covered it on 60 Minutes and other things, like, oh, that's embarrassing. But we never did anything about it. There's no evidence that I've ever seen that they stopped doing stuff like that. And the FBI's been doing stuff like that. And the CIA's been, and GCHQ and MI, they've all been doing stuff like that. So I think, again, it's all eminently investigatable. It's not like secret knowledge that only inner elites with a special crystal ball can know. It's like anybody who puts their mind to the question can know where this is coming from, and then we could do something about it. But again, over-flooded narratives are just in the information space, just re-inflaming our tribalism for this oncoming civil war that certain agencies want to have us fall into. And it's so annoying. It's not even, annoying is not the word. It's exasperating, and we have to change our attitude on that. That's my thought about the immigration thing.
Brilliant take. Yeah, you really summed it up very, very quickly and tidily. And I've gone through a lot of, stages. I never had a. I'm curious if this video stays up, by the way. I'm curious because I didn't want to censor you, and I don't even know exactly what to censor because it's not my subject. But yeah, well, so this will be a good experiment with YouTube anyway.
Fingers crossed.
And so I saw myself becoming a racist. I went to India 8 times. I obviously don't hate that country. But what's happening to us here has made me like
I felt it too, but also just being on Twitter, and I've noticed that X or Twitter, whatever, it infuses videos into my feed that I never asked to watch. Exactly. And I've encountered so many other people who have the exact same experience. If you've got sort of not a conspiracy, maybe openness, you've got a conservative set of values, your profile is in the algorithms, and it will be fed images of immigrants behaving terribly.
Exactly.
And it just re-inflames these subconscious sentiments to get these effects. It's really subtle and very nasty stuff.
Yeah. I've taken to now with X, I only post and I leave. Because it's like you say, anything that comes up, it's trying to incite me. It's trying to get me to vote on one side, and it's decided. I've been aloof. It hasn't really decided who I am yet. Exactly. I don't know. That's probably not true. But wow, what a beautiful, enlightening discussion. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm incredibly happy to have met you, and look forward to future discussions. So if you'd like to visit Matt's website, the Rising Tide Foundation, you can find that link in the notes below. And I did share it up. Where is it?
Oh, it's right there. Yeah.
It's in the it's up in the chat. Pardon me. So yeah, you can. Let me see if I can just grab it again.
Sweet. Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, that when people go to that website, they'll see Edgar Allan Poe's Final Mystery: A Tale of Two Murders is now free to watch. It's a 1.5 hour film that we made, and we just removed the paywall in honor of Edgar Allan Poe's birthday.
Oh, amazing!
A few days ago. So now everybody can watch and share this film that we're very proud of. I mean, I think we brought a lot of new insights into the story of Edgar Allan Poe and what and why he was murdered that I don't think anybody ever got this close to it. So we're very happy that this is out there. If people can share it, that would help us a lot.
Amazing. Yep, very good. And all your books are here as well.
The books are a little bit harder to find. I got to make them easier to find on that website. But if people go to canadianpatriot.org, they're gonna find that the books are much more easy to see. That's canadianpatriot.org for those out there with a pen and pencil. And there's like sections saying buy our books, and you got my wife's books and my books and everything easy to find. And all of our videos and we've got a little production studio we've built up, and we've got like 18 or so films that we've made so far over the past few years. And those are mostly all free to watch as well.
Amazing. So good. Yeah, just huge amounts of content. I got lost in the weeds of your interviews because they were all so interesting. Yeah, okay. So here is the link to the other website, the Canadian Patriot one that you just mentioned, where the books are more readily available. And at this stage, I would highly recommend those. And is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with for now?
I think we gave people a lot of big ideas to chew on for a while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so much in there. I didn't know we were going to get right into the good stuff like that. I thought, this might be a little overview or something like that, and we just zoomed right into it. Very important. No small talk around here. I love it. Yeah. I love it. So this is a series called Evolve, and it is studying the evolution of society and culture. I have a degree in anthropology, but I feel like I'm dumb as a bell on this. So meeting people like you guys is a wonderful experience. And thank you to everyone in the chat. And I apologize, I couldn't pay attention to the chat today. Usually it's a really good flow with the chat and myself, but I needed to pay attention to every single word you were saying there.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I find it difficult to multitask with the chat myself. It's a skill I'm still trying to learn how to do. But next time we get on, we'll I'm sure the universe will always give us a lot to talk about. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun with also the audience as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, have a beautiful rest of your day, Matt. I'll just stay on to close out, and I'll be in touch with you, and I'll see you in Ontario at Julian's place.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. See you then. All right. Thanks for everything.
Okay.
Bye.
You're very welcome. Bye for now. All right. Well, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I have to run, and going to have a nice dinner with my son, who was here on the Beth of Fresh Air last week. And I'm going to play us out with a piece of music that is from one of my albums. And wow, my mind is blown. That was just fantastic. I'm going to run your comments in the end while we're getting serenaded out. My mind's blown. It's so good. Like, ask and ye shall receive. I put a topic out. I asked, thanks to Mr. Voice of Reason here in the chat, I said, who do you think, or is it Julian? Yeah, no, it was Paul. I said, who do you think would be good for this subject? And he hooked me up indirectly. So shout out to you as well. Best return on time investment found on my podcast. Amazing. Thank you, Eliza. That just does my heart a lot of good. And I'm going to watch that Poe film as well. I totally enjoyed the interview. Okay, well, I have to go, so I'm going to run these beautiful comments with our extra that I actually have to set up, I realize. Give me 1 second. Here we go. All right, my dears. What the heck is going on? My mind is blown. Okay. All right, bye for now. Lots of love. Lord and supporter of all, forever free from identity. Be well, I'm dwelling in you. Be well, I am dwelling in you. Be well, I am dwelling in you. Drashtanumanta Shivarta Gupta Maheshwara Paramatme Dijabi